turn. And then I made a gallery walk from our Jamboard pages so that everyone could edit or could comment on the different models without messing up the work, the amazing work that had already been done, but just adding to it, adding comments or ideas or questions. And I gave you some prompts about what you could be doing during the gallery walk in terms of thinking, your own thinking about similarities and differences among the models. And as I was mentioned at the end of the last session, this is something that would probably take a good, 35, 45 minutes at least for students to gather information from the different models. And of course, we were short on time because these sessions are relatively short. You could also ask students to be doing this as homework, to be doing this review before they come together for synchronous learning. So again, there are a lot of different ways that some of you were suggesting this could be modified to make sure you had sufficient time. There was also a comment about using different color stickies. You could decide that a certain color is the color that you're using for the gallery walk so everyone can see what the new comments are more easily. And then there was some great discussion at the end too about how we could do breakout rooms, right? And students to work and process the information on the other posters in groups before coming back together to generate our checklist, right? Because then we started building our gotta have a checklist. So what are some of the things that were common to all of the different models, things that we think we need to be considering if we're thinking about otters and trying to understand this phenomenon of them returning to Marin. So over the break, I just did a little bit of editing and cutting down. And again, this is work you would do collectively with the class, or you would break out into groups and have them work on this. But to think about the things that we definitely want to be considering are things like the conservation efforts that have been happening in the last 40 years in the Greater Bay Area. And part of that is, where do people go and what they can do in otter habitats, right? It should be what people do. That sounds more like what we talked about, what people do and where they can go. And where they can go and what they can do. Sorry, I'm just they can do in otter habitats. And then we even went so far as to say restoration might be a part of this, right? There's conservation, so new rules that might conserve or expand areas that could not be developed or impacted, but then also restoring habitat to maybe some of the conditions prior to human influences, right? So thinking about what that might look like, and changing things like the stream flow and the conditions of the water. And then let's see, we talked about native plants, right? And that idea of native, non-native species that might be impacting the ecosystem. And then also just the general water conditions, temperature, pH, water levels, how much water is there, the salt, right? All of these things are probably going to play into the conditions that otters would be responding to, right? And so something that wasn't mentioned, but that you would probably get to, right, if we'd had more time, was about their food source and like who else, again, what other organisms live there that the otters rely on, right? Might be something to add to this list. Are there any other ideas that come to mind before we move on? Just any last minute additions? I know I asked you to, if you have time, review your models, but I don't want to cut anyone off if anyone has any ideas that they want to add at this point to our list. Okay, so what we will do is move forward with this list. And again, if this was a class, we would then be thinking about what are the revisions that we want to make to our individual models to reflect that list of things, that gotta have it checklist. And so now we're going to move forward. So now we've made some revisions and we have some new questions and some new ideas. about, again, what do otters look for and need? Why are these otters able to thrive again in Marana? And so I just want to point out that the information and the data that I'm going to be using over the next hour, a lot of it is coming from the River Otter Ecology Project, or related to the River Otter Ecology Project, and you'll be hearing from the leader of this project tomorrow. Luckily, we will have Megan with us to share her work. But again, a lot of the questions that you've been asking have come back to what do otters need? What are they looking for? So I want to ask you the question is how do we know what river otters eat? How might we find that out? That's a question that keeps coming up about otter food and what do they need to survive. So how would we figure this out? I want to hear from you guys. What do you think we could do? You know, pulling from your prior knowledge or what's possible to figure this question out? What kind of data or information would you need to gather? So Dawn, you showed us something earlier at the beginning of the last session. Would you mind pulling that out again? Do you still have it with you?
Yeah, I do. And
okay.
You know, the otters that I see in Paper Mill Creek, I've seen them crawl up under the muddy bank, under the willows, and clear across the creek, I can hear them chomping. And I think they're crunching either crawdads, of course, but I think they're crunching bones sometimes. But at any rate, yeah, I think you refer to this guy that I brought in.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the last session, Don showed us this amazing skull that he has. And I think with the help of Whitney, we figured out that maybe this isn't a river otter skull, but it might be a sea otter skull. We're not 100% sure, but we know that they look fairly similar. A lot of the features are very the same. And so what Don was describing is a couple different things, right? So we can be making observations, right? We can be watching them. We also might hear them. And what they're doing is, yeah, they're crunching on things, and they have some pretty impressive teeth. So I'm going to just show you. This is an image I was able to pull of a river otter skull. So the average size of these is about 4.5 inches, about 11.5 centimeters. And what was yours, Don? Yours is a little bit bigger, right?
This one's 14.
Okay, yeah, so a little bit
14
bigger.
centimeters.
Yeah, yep. So it might be just a very large river otter. We're not certain, but that would be a good question to investigate and try to figure out the average size. And Whitney, if you have any more insight, please share, or if anyone else does.
Oh, you know what? Your drawing is different than this. I'm looking at the shape of the zygomatic arch is different than in your drawing.
So I don't know if I'm assuming this is a complete skull, but I'm not certain if the zygomatic arch is there.
Can you rotate it so the foramen magnum is facing towards the video so we can see those zygomatic arches from the bottom? Like rotate it. Yeah, perfect, like that. Yeah. I don't know, I've never seen a sea otter skull before. I've only worked with river otter skull, and the sea otters have a lot bigger of a zygomatic arch right there, like you're pointing out, Don, because I looked up, their jaw muscles are so huge because they have to crush those crustaceans, and they are biting through like those seashells more.
Right.
But that's such a cool source, man.
Well, that one came from Bolinas Lagoon, so it could either be, it could have been either because the lagoon is brackish. So I'll go with sea otter. I think you're right.
But again, what are we basing this off of? Whitney's talking about what we know sea otters eat, and the fact that they need a lot of power in those jaws, right? And so then structurally, what would have to be different potentially to explain sea otter diets versus river otter diets? So we're getting into some of our cross-cutting concepts around like form and function, right? And understanding those relationships. So again, this was an aside that you guys brought up, which I thought was great. So thank you for sharing that. And so one way that we can be getting clues about what things eat, right? And also like what they need to be able to eat the food sources in their environments is by the form and the function of their their bodies, right? And their jaws and how much muscle they have, right? And the shapes of their teeth. So a lot, you know, again, these are all resources that we can be thinking about and using to try to uncover this this information. So I just wanted to show you really quickly. So obviously form and function of skulls is one way. And then Don also mentioned that he sees otters, right? We could be watching otters. We could look for otter pictures that show us images of them feeding. So what do we see in this image? What does it look like that this otter is eating? Looks like fish, right? So this is an image from iNaturalist. And so someone actually made this observation and recorded it and added it to iNaturalist. And this guy's chomping on a fish right here. So what about these? What do you see in these photos?
Oh shoot, I've seen those crawdad carcasses on my hikes before, all like torn apart and stuff.
Looks like a young seagull too. So maybe they can't eat an adult seagull, but maybe a small one.
So maybe this is a seagull, maybe a young one. How do you know it's a, or maybe, why are you thinking it's a young one, Eva? What makes you think that?
The coloring looks different than seagulls I've seen. The spots on the head, I've never seen that before. The plumage looks a little bit more fluffy.
Yep.
Like
Yeah. Maybe this is a young seagull, or it seems like a pretty, maybe it's a small one. We don't have a scale bar here, but we could try to figure that. And what about this image over here? So I think, Whitney, you said that it looks like the crawdads that you've seen. Yeah, so some kind of crustacean, right? But again, this is from the Otter Project, and this is from also from iNaturalist. So people are making direct observations to see what they are, what they're eating, watching them eat. What else could we do? And I mentioned it very briefly yesterday. What else do otters leave behind that we might be able to use to figure out what they eat? Scat, right? Their poop. We could be using that as evidence. So it was really funny when I started going onto iNaturalist. What I started seeing is some of the observations weren't actually pictures of otters, but were pictures of scat. So this is one of those observations that was made in Marin. Here's the spot. You can go in and find it yourself if you want to. This is an observation from 2014. And this has been identified by at least 3 people. When 3 people identify something in iNaturalist and they all agree, it becomes a research grade. I think it's 3. I can't remember if that's the exact number, but at least a number of people have to agree on what this is. And so people are pretty certain, yeah, this is a North American river otter poop that was left to find and was logged as a sighting. So the Otter Project, ecology project based in Marin, has done some studies using scat. And of course, you can also find evidence that otters have been somewhere because of their tracks, right? And their little webbed feet, little webbed tracks. And so what they've done, I think especially in the last 4 or 5 years, is go out and actually collect scat in these different places. And this is, you know, around Tomales Bay and Point Reyes National Seashore. And so this map shows you some of the places where they collected otter scat. And so what I just want to share with you really quickly is this is the study method. So they've been analyzing the scat. It's because it's a non-invasive way. What do we mean by non-invasive? A non-invasive way to figure out what they're eating. What would be an invasive way?
Interacting with the animal?
What'd you say? Say that one more time, Chris.
You're not interacting with the animal?
Right, you're not interacting with the animal. You don't have to hurt the animal or dissect the animal, right? It's just a complete, it's what the animal leaves behind. So it's a non-invasive way. And so that most of that, of the prey species that we know that they eat have hard parts that are present in the scat. So things like bones and scales from fish and feathers and hair. And so you can be looking at that in the scat, right? So what some data I'm going to show you in a second are from 2014 to 2016, where they collected 84 river otter scats from those different sites on the map. And the diet analysis was actually performed by the volunteers and the interns and even students from local high schools to analyze how much of the different things were present in that scat. Are there any questions so far about what they did? So here's some pictures that they shared in their report of students analyzing these data and dissecting the scat. And then this is the information I want to share with you that I'm hoping will also help inform our models. Okay, so again, here are the 4 different sites where they were found. So why don't you just take a second and interpret this graph. I'll give you a minute, and then we'll come back together and talk about what we're seeing and thinking.
I'm having major tech issues today.
Oh no, what's going on, Chris?
So I apologize. I think my district is like doing stuff because my network is totally down. My sound isn't working and I can barely hear you, and it keeps dropping off. So
can everyone else hear me
I'm having a hard
okay?
time following today. What's that?
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone else can hear me. Yeah, okay, it looks like other people can hear me. I'm sorry you're having issues.
Yeah, no, it's just me because it keeps
Chris,
dropping
you
off.
might want to leave and then re-enter the meeting.
That's a good suggestion.
So
yeah.
I tried that and it didn't help.
It didn't help.
I think it's my network because it's taking like 10 minutes to like log on.
Well, luckily
Very
this is being
frustrating.
recorded, so you can go back and re-listen to parts of
That's
it if
very
there's certain
true.
parts that are being that you feel like you're really missing. So
Yeah, I know.
yeah, no, this is the struggle with with Zoom conferences and teaching. It's definitely the reality.
Well, I'm
It's
guessing
not
they're
always perfect.
Yeah, they're doing it. Whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't care.
Okay, so let's come back together. So what did we notice in this graph? What information does this provide? Does anyone want to start us off with just what did they notice about the diets of river otters?
Like, would you notice there's more fish in the North Tamales Bay and less birds?
So that there's a lot of fish is what I heard from you, Chris, right? And then some of them have birds. Yep. Is it always the same amount relatively at every site?
No.
Chris is saying no. It's not the same across. And then what's this third category that we have?
Invertebrates are
Invertebrates.
major food consumption in the southern Tamales Bay.
Yeah. So first of all, what are invertebrates? Does anyone want to share what they're
No
thinking?
backbone.
No backbones. So what are some examples of organisms that don't have backbones?
Shrimp, oysters.
Shrimp, oysters,
Sea stars.
sea stars. Whitney, earlier you had mentioned a crawdad, right? We saw one in that image. That would be an invertebrate. What else? Anything else?
Is it an invertebrate if it has an exoskeleton?
Oh, yep. A lot of them have exoskeletons. Yep. Yeah, and so that's what they're finding in this scat, right? Are the remains, the shells and the exoskeletons of these invertebrates, and that's how they can tell that they've been eaten by the river otters. Cool. So is this what we expected? Did we expect to see these 3 categories? Are there any surprises based on your prior knowledge or experience or thoughts about river otter diets?
I didn't know that they ate birds.
Honestly, I didn't either. I didn't know that was such could be a consistent part of their diet, I should say. Maybe it's not the largest part of their diet, but that it's something that they would do is consistently bring down a bird or
maybe duck eggs or something, but I didn't know that they'd, yeah.
And that's a question I have is like, what do those interactions look like? Does anyone know? Has anyone seen this? So this is the question I definitely want to ask Megan tomorrow, is like when they're eating these larger prey, I know that they're good hunters in the water. But then what does this process look like when they're eating birds? and like you said, are they eating eggs? It sounds like, I mean, based on that image we have, it looks like they're really eating like whole birds, or they're able to catch or consume adults, or at least what look like almost adult birds, which is really interesting. Does anyone want to add to that?
The first thing that came to my mind when I was thinking about the birds is that that's especially if they're young, that's a very seasonal resource. So I've already got some more questions bubbling around of, I wonder if maybe they move to different areas depending on what sources are available.
That's a really interesting idea, Whitney. Do you want to expand on that a little more? What do you mean by move to different areas?
I've done a lot of work out at Tamales Bay, and I know that like Drake's Bay and Abbott's Lagoon, although they're very different environments providing, like I know Drake's Bay, that's where the elephant seals do their thing during certain parts of the year. And I know Abbott's Lagoon, there's a lot of rookeries there. And there's also you have the salmon run, there's steelhead that come into Tamales Bay. So there's a bunch of seasonal cycles that are all happening at different times within this really kind of small location. And I'm wondering if they're hopping around depending on when certain resources are abundant. Is my one.
That's really interesting. Does anyone want to add to that idea? Thanks, Whitney. Anyone else want to build off of that?
Well, I'll just mention that Dawn wrote something interesting in the chat, which is that perhaps they get up into the streams that feed the bay or the lagoon.
So Dawn, can you explain more about, or do you want to explain more? What do you think Dawn means by that?
Well, that they venture out of that area, perhaps where the scat was found, and get into a different kind of a habitat for food sources.
Oh, interesting. So maybe the scat doesn't just reflect where they may have not been eating those things where the scat was found. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, like, I didn't know that they had latrine sites. Where did we see that?
Yeah, so there's a comment in here about that they have latrine sites, and we're gonna talk to Megan about that tomorrow, because my understanding is that they have these common sites that are used by different groups of otters. So that's a really interesting point that you're making. And I wasn't gonna get into that today. I was gonna leave that for Megan tomorrow, but thanks for noticing that. Or maybe you heard about it somewhere else. Yeah, so there's some diversity in the diet. And I think that's kind of what Don's getting at. And then he also said, that the fish appear to be a larger percentage right at the mouth of the bay. Yep. Anything else you want to add to this? These thoughts? These are great ideas. And again, it's raising a lot of questions about not just what they eat, but also how much do they move, right? How much space do river otters need, and how much ground do they cover? And like Whitney was describing, like these are really different environments. So, what does that look like for a group of otters, and how much are they using all these different parts of this coastal or these different coastal habitats? And so, again, if we had more time, something that we would do with students is really show kids pictures of these different places, right? And give them a sense of like, how are these environments different, or why might otters be using these different sites? And what do these different sites provide, right? Like where do we find all the things that otters want and need in these different places? So you could really expand this out, right? And think very broadly about the ecosystem that they're in, and think about these locations. Anyone want to add anything else? So again, if we had more time, which I think is going to be the theme of the next half hour, we would be using this information to revise your models. So could you guys share out what would you be adding now to your models if you had time to discuss this with your groups? What are the big ideas just based on that one graph that I shared with you and some of those pictures? What would that information be? Or those questions. I also heard some good questions that might get included in your model now. What were some of those questions we still have? Well, first of all,
are we doing some sharing out?
Yeah, feel free to share.
Oh.
Feel free to unmute yourself. Yep.
Well, I don't know if this is relevant or more suited for tomorrow, but I'm wondering if I see a river otter somewhere, where can I report the location?
You're going to learn all about that tomorrow. So there is a citizen science project that is trying to collect that data, and they started collecting it in 2012. So that is a great way to report your sighting. The other place, of course, is iNaturalist. You could be using iNaturalist in that way as well.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Yeah, so both of those, but we'll be learning more about the River Otter Ecology Project tomorrow. So it's a great question. So Eva said, I'm curious how the populations of birds, fish, invertebrates have increased in Marin over the last 40 years, or how they've changed. And if that's the reason why otters have returned. Also, if the populations have decreased in other habitats, pushing the otters towards Marin. Oh, that's an interesting idea, Eva. So you're saying maybe it's not just about what's changed in Marin, but also maybe what's changed outside of Marin, and the conditions in Marin might be more favorable right now than in other places. Really interesting. And then Dawn asks, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, almost like a push and pull. We were talking about that, and I was talking about that with my group yesterday.
I like that idea of a push and a pull. Yeah. So what are the things that would be maybe even potentially not just pulling otters back, but pushing them back from other places where maybe the conditions have changed? That's really interesting. We're going to come back to the idea in just a little bit. And then Dawn asks, are they strictly carnivorous, or is there evidence that they eat plants? That's a great question, Dawn. And yeah, and then Whitney says, were they looking for seeds and berries? That's a great question to be writing down, that you can ask Megan tomorrow. And then Julie writes, I want to know more about their behavior of movement, range within a day, a week. I completely agree, Julie. I think there's a lot to learn about how much they really move and how much space they use. And like Whitney was even talking about earlier, do they move seasonally to different parts of the watershed to use different resources depending on when resources are available? So, and Dawn says, great question. These are great questions. So I'm going to save this chat and I'm going to remind you tomorrow if there's ever any silence with Megan, I'll be like, remember some of these questions from yesterday? So these are great. Thank you, everyone. Any more thoughts, ideas, questions, comments? These would be great additions to your model. So remember that modeling, the idea here is that it's an iterative practice, right? So that you're gonna, maybe you haven't reviewed your comments from the gallery walk yet, so you would do that as a group. You would then use your gotta have it checklist and some these new data sources, this information that we're talking about with the diets to revise your model. And really think about what do you want to add, remove, or modify. And it sounds like some of what we're adding are some really great and focused questions, right? About like what's going on with the otters, where are they eating, where do they go? And so all of that you would want to be recording, right? Again, making our thinking visible, putting it down on paper so that we have a record of it and can come back to it and revise our ideas for later. So does anyone have any final thoughts, comments, questions about the model revision that might happen at this stage? Again, if we had time. Any ideas?
How long does the chat comment last?
Say that again. How long does the chat comment last?
Like all these comments on chat,
yep.
You're able as the instructor to make a copy of these, right? And then get back to the class the next time? Or can the kids see it once the session is over? Where's the chat stored?
So you can save it. You can ask Zoom to save it, and then you can open it later. or you can send it to everyone. So I think currently my setting on Zoom automatically saves every chat from all of the meetings that I'm on. Does anyone else have any more experience with Zoom in that way that they want to share? Or any tricks they know?
I'd just like to know, is it easy to figure out? Like if you've never used Zoom, you've been using Google Meet or whatever?
So if you go to the chat, does everyone have the chat open? It's a little, you're in the chat box. So it says to everyone, and then there's a little thing on the right side with 3 dots.
Save chat, yeah.
Yep, and then in those 3 dots, the first thing is save chat.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that's
but
how
then
you
does
can
it
save
come
it.
to
Yeah.
you?
Sorry?
I'm going to save it right now and see what happens.
So what it does is create a file right now based on the chat that's already there. And the question that I still need to figure out is if it continues to update it throughout the meeting, or if you have to prompt it to save it again at the end to make sure you caught everything.
Right.
And I don't have the, does anyone else have the answer to that question? It goes in a Zoom file. It's a part of Zoom.
So then you would go to your files in Zoom and then upload the list, and then you could work the revision, you could work the questions for your next class from that, or give kids a copy.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So it saves it to a special file that Zoom makes, and it's usually dated with the date from the meeting. So yeah. But these are good questions about just how do we do this online, right? Because we want this to be interactive. We want to have a record of our thoughts and our discussions, and yeah, the Zoom chat is one way to do that. I do find it hard to, as you've probably noticed, to be facilitating and talking to people and monitor the chat at the same time. That can be difficult.
Yeah.
So what I do encourage is having certain times, if you're doing this in a class of, you know, more than a few people, having certain times where people just use the chat and they can put their ideas down in writing then, or they could you know, write in the chat, but expect that you're not going to get to it immediately, right? That it's not going to be an immediate response, and you can set that norm at the beginning. So we didn't really do that, but everyone's been so helpful and also cluing me in on what's going on in the chat. So thank you for doing that as I'm facilitating.
I just wanted to say that at zoom.us, just like you can access your recorded meetings, that's where you would find your chats that you saved.
You can, yeah, you can save them to the web as well.
So anybody can save the chat.
Yes, anybody can save the chat.
So it'll be really important actually for teachers to monitor it somehow, because there could be inappropriate things. Like I have, you know, 50 to 80 kids per Zoom when I teach middle school classes.
Yep.
So it's really hard to keep track of everything.
Yep, exactly. Okay,
Yeah.
so sadly, in the interest of time, we're just going to move on for right now. Again, I'm happy to stay on after the session officially ends if there are more questions about Zoom or the content or anything else. But I just want to really quickly come back together and think about, like, so what are some of the cross-cutting concepts we've been thinking about over the last couple of days? What are the ones that we've been addressing? So we talked about patterns. Not seeing any responses. Oh, what'd you say?
Cause and effect.
We've certainly looked at cause and effect, right? What has affected the otters? What causes changes in otter distribution? Yep. What about scale or proportion or quantity?
We just all sizes and amount of things in scat. And
yeah, looking at the proportion of things in the scat. Sorry,
of what they eat. The birds and invertebrates and fish.
Yep, how much of the things they eat. Someone else was going to chime in too, I think. Jordan, was that you?
Well, that's just what I was going to say. Yeah.
Awesome. And what about systems? Thinking about systems and system models. Have we done that? Is that right? That's been actually the main focus of what we've been doing, right? Is building a model that explains the system that the otters live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what about energy and matter? We haven't touched on it maybe explicitly, but we've certainly been talking about otter food, right? Where do otters get their energy? How do they function, right? And then we did just now touch on structure and function. What do otter teeth look like? What do their jaws look like? What is the rest of their skull and maybe the muscles? What do those look like to allow them to eat certain foods? And what about number 7, stability and change? What do you guys think? Right?
We looked at 40 years ago to now and how things have changed and looking into why and the instability of it.
Exactly. The entire phenomenon is really centering around understanding change and what is causing changes in that otter range and coming up with those explanations. So I'm just going to give you a little bit more information. And that's the ideas I'm sort of modeling, like over time, you know, as new questions arise, you can provide a little more information, a little more data, a new experience, right? A new activity for students to think about and process and connect back to the otters. So I wanted to show you a couple more maps before we get into our next group activity. And so what do you see here? What you see here, I should just say, is historical tidal marshes. So tidal marshes are one of the places where river otters are seen. And this is what the green part is, where there were tidal marshes in the Greater Bay Area around 1800. Now, I think this map was made around 2014, but this shows you where there is still tidal marsh is the light green. This darker green is the restored Baylands tidal marsh area. And then these dark greens area are the planned restorations and enhancements. But look at this difference. What do you guys notice?
There's more planning.
There's more planning, which is good. What else? What about this difference from 1800 to present? Even if all that planned area happens in the next, 10, 15, 20 years.
There's been a lot of landfill.
Yeah, there's been a lot of marshland that's lost, right? Even if we do all this restoration, I mean, look at all the green that's around even parts of San Francisco and the East Bay and all around Marin and the Marin, just north of the Golden Gate.
It was much more marsh area previously.
Exactly. There was a lot more tidal marsh. So thinking about how, again, how we as humans have changed the land. And so these are some other maps that show population. So the darker the red means the denser the populations. Thinking about where we live, right? And you could go back and forth looking at these population maps and then looking at where those tidal marshes are. And the reality is that we have built up this, our human environments around these historical tidal marshes, and we have changed the land certainly to suit our needs. So again, these are historical data and also data from today that show us what we've done and where we live. And so what I want us to do for sort of the rest of our time together is to think more broadly again about, like, what do otters need that relates to, the space and the habitat that they occupy. And sort of the 4 categories that we can think about are, air, life, water, and then earth. And so these are our 4 spheres, right, that are referred to in that 5th grade earth science standard that I showed you earlier about the interactions between the spheres. So the first thing I want you to do in your groups is just do a quick brainstorm. What are those things related to air, water, life, and earth? And, earth can be like where they live and the types of substrate and habitat that they have, right? Rocks and soil. And so what are the things that they need related to those 4 categories? So just for example, like I think that, and this is a very vague statement, but that they need clean water, that the water can't be dirty, we don't want it to be polluted with certain things, heavy metals is what I'm imagining, things like that. We want this water to be clean. So the first thing I want you to do is to write down other ideas that you have in those 4 categories with your group. And then the second step that I want you to do is think about how could human activities affect what otters need. So I only gave you 3 of these concepts on each of your Jamboards. And I want you to try to connect using, arrows and words and describe the cause and effect relationships. When we build cities, which parts of those otter needs are affected when we build cities? And it might be more than one, right? And so again, just as an example, I'm thinking that if we and if pollution and waste enters our watershed, that will affect the clean water and maybe reduce the amount of clean water in the watersheds. And then ultimately that could harm the health of the otters, right? Coming back to life, coming back to the effect on our river otters. So that's an example. So I'd like you to build out some examples in your groups. So you're gonna have about 10 minutes to do this, and I'm sorry we don't have more time. Again, we're time limited here. But Michelle, if you could send people into the 4 groups, is that possible for you to
Yes,
do
sure
that?
thing.
Awesome, thank you.
I'll open those right now.
Okay, and then after your, you should find this stuff or this page on your Jamboard after the last page that you worked on before. So you can go back to this Jamboard group, right, and click on 1 through 4, depending on which group you end up in. All right, so we'll see you in maybe 10 minutes. And I'll check in with all of you. So. Oh, and if group 4 wants to stay here, that'd be great. Will group 4, will you stay here again? Okay,
so
thank you.
To go to the breakout room, we don't, we just stay?
Just stay here, yep, and I'll go get the people who, or actually, Michelle, could you go get the people who might have already hit go, if anyone did? Looks like there are 4 people here though, so we have a group. Michelle, does it look like anyone went to group 4?
To the Jamboard?
So if you go to the slide deck, here, I can send you your group 4. Oop, that's not working.
Well, I'm here on group 4, do I just click it?
Yep, you can click it and that's your Jamboard.
Okay.
It looks like no one joined group 4.
Okay,
screen.
perfect.
Thank you. My screen?
Say that one more time.
I can't click it on your screen. I have to click it on my screen because you're just sharing your screen right now.
Yep, I'm going to stop share and then I'm going to put it in the chat. This is a direct link to your Jamboard.
Okay, so that would be the way to do it with students, is just give them the direct link on the chat.
You can, yeah, or you can put it in a file that they have access to. Like you have access to those slides, so some people are just going back to the slide deck. Yep. Okay, so is everyone getting into the Jamboard? It looks like some people just joined. Is it okay if I share my screen so everyone can see? Okay, is this your Jamboard? Is this what it looks like to you? All right, cool. All right, so I see someone already added the air needs to be the correct temperature, not too hot, not too cold. What else do otters need in these 4 spheres?
Now you're sharing your screen again. So where's the screen that I can work on?
You're gonna have to click back to your browser where you linked to, you're gonna have to, enter out of full screen, right? Like you did before. Up at the top. Were you able to do it, Chris?
No.
No?
No. So I'm exiting the full screen, what I'm doing, and then I'm...
Well, why don't you just, like, maybe Dawn and I can help write down... Oh, are you doing it? Okay.
I think I get it. I just exit the full screen.
Okay.
Right? I don't know. That's where I struggle, is going in between all the different apps and the different, especially on a bad tech day, but I think I got it. Out-haul?
So explain, what do we mean by out-hauls?
I'm thinking places for the otters to get out of the water. They need they need not just water, but they're making their dens on land. They're looking for cover. They're places to make their nests, places to eat.
Will you add those ideas, Dawn? I think that's great. So like their dens and places where they eat.
Okay.
Those are awesome.
adding on to Dawn from our last examples, places to deposit scat.
Yay!
Keep it sounding sciencey.
Yes. Very good. So food such as fish, birds, and vertebrate, right? Because we know that from some data that we already looked at. Very good. What else? Shelter. Very good.
Trying to think.
So this is a great list. So why don't we start making the connections with the human activities? Because we only have a few more minutes. So why don't should we start with building cities or creating natural habitats or fishing and hunting? Which one do you want to start with?
I want to pull up, can we, if we have it available, can we pull up one of the maps? Because I'm looking at like the city map, I guess it was slide 55, where it says household density.
Yeah.
And it definitely looks like, do we just drag and drop?
Yeah, drag and drop those and then draw arrows to which ones they connect to.
Oh, okay. Build cities, I feel like was really, like the map really brought out the earth component for me. And I'm thinking about like what Dawn was saying, like places for them just to get out of the water and like rest. I think a lot of those got eliminated.
Interesting. Yeah, I like
kind
that
of like
idea.
this too.
Yeah.
If there's a house, there's nowhere for you to deposit your scat. I think it affects all of those things.
Yep. Very good. Anything else that building cities affects that we want to connect to?
Arrow icon that you can use.
Oh, I can't hear you, Chris. Say it again.
Is there an arrow
that's much better.
You can use, or do you have to draw it with a pen?
You can draw it with the pen, or the other thing, you can import an arrow that students can use and copy paste, make copies of.
So we'd have to import that.
I didn't import it, but so if you want to draw a straight line, so I know some people want to draw, if you hold down the shift key as you draw the line, it'll be a straight line if you want to draw straight arrows. So.
And something, Chris, that I found out that I think I might use a lot and be useful with like these little icons, if you click on the image and then there's like 3 dots, 3 vertical dots, and you click on that, you can duplicate things. So you can have more than one icon of the same kind. Because my brain kind of works like that too. I like to put lots of
that's a great idea.
Isn't that nifty?
Yes, I love it.
I know I'm gonna have to like have a clip art folder just for all of my Jamboard template.
Jessica, you imported all these images, right? And you have them?
I did, but what you can do is import them all into one Jamboard and then duplicate the Jamboards if you need multiple Jamboards. Yeah.
I see.
Yep, so you only have to import all the pieces once, luckily.
I see.
Yep. Okay, should we do one more? So creating habitats, I see someone moved that one. So that relates to our, and I saw someone connected building cities to needed food. Explain more about what that means. When we build cities, it affects the food.
Well, doesn't it limit the food, so the access to more fish and birds and vertebrates with the cities there?
Yeah, so you're talking about like just the physical access, like getting to places where there's might be food.
Taking up
Interesting.
Yep. But otherwise have wildlife?
Yeah, taking up space. Yep. Definitely. And then I see that creating natural habitats is being connected, and someone moved fishing and hunting into the life section. Awesome. Great. It looks like you guys are making a lot of connections. And again, if we had more time, you would be writing down and explanations as well of what some of those arrows mean, right? And discussing them and deciding. And I see someone even used a plus signal, or plus, you can use pluses and minuses or to show increase or decrease. So it looks like that building cities maybe leads to increasing in hunting, fishing and hunting is the way I'm reading that. Does everyone agree? Is that what was intended?
That's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking also of like the two things combined.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, I guess I'm thinking about things together. And I don't know who, what is that? Anonymous Arak, who's writing pollution out right now. I'm also, the pollution, I'm also thinking like the air, like pavement gets air hotter than just like grass.
Yes. Yep, it'll affect all of those environments, and including the temperature of the air and the surfaces, certainly. Yep. That might be a factor.
You know, sometimes the fishing and hunting, which is often seen as detrimental, but often fishing and hunting can contribute to water quality and habitat through conservation efforts. Some of the most active and effective conservation efforts come through from people who are preserving fisheries and preserving natural habitats, because without those you don't have hunting and fishing. So sometimes there's a hidden benefit there to those practices.
I completely agree. And yeah, a lot of people who engage in fishing and hunting, they want those to be healthy ecosystems because they want to be able to go out and do those things and also not feel like they are disturbing or destroying populations of organisms that they're hunting or fishing. Yep.
So that one could be either a benefit or a detriment.
Yeah, depending on the kind of fishing and hunting practices that are used and the goals of the people involved, certainly. I completely agree with you, Dawn.
Jessica, should I bring people back from the breakout?
You could bring people back, that'd be great. Well, thank you, Group 4, for being so awesome and letting us record you and all of your thoughts and contributions. Much appreciated. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and then. So, and I know, Kelsey, we're just wrapping up. I have about 2 more minutes to go over with everyone. And then I'll hand it over to you. Does that work?
So Jessica, I'm still in the Jamboard. How do I get to the Zoom?
I'm sharing my screen now. So if you want to close the Jamboard and click back to Zoom. Okay, so we're time.
What kind of laptop are you on?
I'm on a MacBook Pro.
So down at the bottom, you should have the Zoom icon that you should be able to click on. Don't you have a bar at the bottom?
Well, there's a bar at the top, but it's my account. It's not.
Oh no, this has like Finder and Google Chrome and
like all the things that are on your computer.
All your stuff. Yeah. Mail. At the bottom? No, when you I don't know how old your computer is, so maybe it's
okay.
Okay.
So I'm sorry to have to move on.
But I have to go all the way back to Mail to get to the link of the Zoom. So I feel like there's an easier way to do this.
Okay, so just as I mentioned earlier, the activity we just did started to get at this idea of interactions and thinking about the four spheres and being a little more specific now that we know a little bit more about otters and their environment. So, but you can see that the activities that we've done over the last 2 days have really helped build an understanding of potentially both these things or build towards them, right, to support these target performance expectations. So I just want to share with you really quickly, this is a graphic that I designed as part of my project called Understanding Global Change. And what we did was develop this conceptual framework, and I'm not encouraging you to share this with your students in exactly the way that I'm sharing with you now, because I'm thinking of you as adult learners, but the idea is that there are three main components to our framework, that there are major causes of change, and those red icons that you just had in your model are part of those major causes of change that include both mainly human today, or humans were the major forcing in the world right now, but that there are also over deep time, especially over tens of thousands to millions of years, there are other things that happen in the Earth system that cause change. But the rate and magnitude of change today, whether we're talking about climate change or environmental change, this is primarily today because of human activities, right? And what we do is we put pressure, we influence the Earth system, and really change, can alter some of these big processes that explain how the world works. And then when we understand how the world works, we can also think about how do we measure change? How do we measure things in the world over time? And again, we can divide up those concepts into things related to air, life, water, and earth. Or if you want, you can use the spheres: atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and geosphere. So again, the major concept that we've been talking about is, where do organisms live, right? This is a change that we measure. We measured it in the otters. We saw that map to monitor that change. And what we suspect is that, some of those that change in that otter range has something to do maybe with how species interact and what other species were available, maybe for that organism, for otters to eat. And also their habitat, and especially the water cycle and the rivers and the way the rivers have been altered over time, and especially in recent history. And then finally, we can turn to major causes of change. And so these were some of the ones that I put on your Jamboards for this last activity, things like pollution and building cities and creating natural habitats and fishing and hunting. These are things that change the way the world is, and then there are things we can measure to know that those changes have happened. And just to show you really quickly, I don't expect you to absorb any of this, but we have a lot of concepts that we've put into this, what we call the infographic. And we call it an infographic because it's very complex and we wouldn't expect you to digest it all at once or in 2 minutes. But the idea is that there are lots of things we can measure. There are lots of fundamental things that tell us about how the world works. And then there are lots of things that especially humans do that cause changes in our Earth system and those interconnections. So this framework that I'm just very briefly showing you is a lens through which to see science content. We can often connect almost any concept that we teach about science to climate change and global change and environmental change issues and concepts. And it's also a great "you are here" map to think about what concepts are you teaching and also how are they interconnected. Like if you're teaching photosynthesis, what is photosynthesis connected to? Deforestation, climate change, greenhouse gases, that these are things we can be talking about really broadly. Or if you're teaching ecology, what are all the parts of the Earth system that we can touch, both living and non-living? So again, coming back to this idea of transforming information into knowledge, making those connections explicit. In the slideshow, I've given you the full set of the icons we're calling it right now the grades 3 through 5. What we really mean is that this is more accessible language for younger learners. We also have sort of what we call the complex or the original version that we think of as for middle school, high school, and above. And then just the other resource really quickly is we've created this template on which you can draw Earth system models and use these icons for showing connections. But you could also be using a picture. This is a picture of Marin. This is the Hamilton Wetland Restoration Project. You could be making a model on a picture of your local environment showing these different major things interacting to affect the way the world works. And there's a whole interactive that we built with BioInteractive at HHMI that allows you to make these types of models, save them, revise them, change the background, do all sorts of fancy things. But we also have done a lot of work with teachers and classrooms using the paper cards and laminated posters and things like that that can be reused over and over and over again. So if you're interested in these resources, please check out our website on Clean. We also have a new website that will be launching in the next few weeks with these and other resources. So with that, I'm sorry to cut this off, but thank you all so much for your participation and your thoughts over the last couple days. It's been really an honor to work with all of you and get to know you a bit. And I really hope that we will continue this work together on the NOAA grant. And we're going to be asking you some questions about if you are available to participate, because we're going to continue to build out these resources so that they are responsive to your classroom needs, whether for distance learning or in classroom instruction. So thank you again. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey. I'm sorry, Kelsey, that we ran into your time.
Oh, before we go to Kelsey, I just want to launch the poll really quick. It's just an interest poll if you're interested in finding out more about the NOAA grant participation. There's 2 questions, and it should take about a second or so for you to complete.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I just launched it. You should be able to answer the 2 quick questions, and then we'll go to Kelsey.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping, Michelle. Much appreciated.
Of course.
And thank you, Kelsey, for being patient. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start sharing my screen as you guys finish your poll.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. All right. Okay. So we're just going to do a really quick closing. Everybody can give me a thumbs up if you're done with the poll and ready to move to the last thing, or if you just need a second, you can give me a thumbs down. All right, looks like we're pretty much ready. So we're just going to do a really quick closing to kind of frame something that we're going to be working on tomorrow. And so up in your screen, the shared screen, you should be able to see an image of 3 different things. There we go. And I just wanted to do a quick reflection with you guys on this, specifically to ask you, what do you notice? What do you notice about this image? And if you want to, let's start by just chatting. So if you want to unmute and share your observations, let's do that first. So again, the question is, what do you notice?
There's no beginning or end.
There's no beginning or end. Let's see. Who was that?
Who said that?
Oh yeah, Jordan. Thank you. Sorry. I'm like scrolling through my little side thing here. So Jordan pointed out there's no beginning or end. What's another observation we can find?
There's similarities between the 3 circles, similar steps in the cycle.
Okay, Eva, can you, sorry, is it Eva or am I pronouncing that correctly?
Eva.
Eva, okay, great. Can you expand on that a little bit? What are some of the similarities you see?
Yeah, like, let's see. You have research the problem. In one circle, it says experiment or have a question. In the middle circle, you have the step of creation. I don't know, I just see a lot of like, I mean, there's definitely different words, but I think they're representing a similar process, design process.
Interesting. I want to pull out a couple of things that you mentioned. One is that they are different words, but they're similar concepts. So I appreciate that. And it goes back to Jordan's comment too, that there's some cyclicalness. Our results are for the poll are up. And then the other thing being, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the last part that you said?
Oh, different words, but representing similar concepts and in the same, like, seems like it's the design process.
Right. And that you pointed out specifically some language around design, which I appreciated. Let's go with just 2 more observations. What do you notice about this?
They're action words, and they're higher thinking order skills. It involves Bloom's taxonomy of creation and analysis.
Excellent.
So it involves, it allows students to actually take part in using these models. They're not, it's not stagnant.
Yeah. Yeah, so Ken's mentioning that they're action-oriented. Some of the items that they're identifying are action-oriented. And we can imagine that in that action-oriented structure that it's an invitation for direct engagement from our students rather than just asking them to observe, right? So active engagement, cyclical, and some cross-cutting or some similar concepts across models. All right. Does anyone recognize any of these systems here? The engineering design process in the bottom left. All right, I'm going to go to our next slide here. So, yeah, congrats, you got it. So we have the engineering process, the scientific method, and the creative process are just three of the processes that we've pulled out for this conversation. And up in the corner, you'll see that they're all under the label of STEAM. So Ken, just a couple people, can you share sort of what STEAM means? Just so that I know we're in a STEAM professional development, but I'd love to hear your read on what STEAM means. Sorry, I am having trouble hearing audio.
Yeah, my sound is really bad. So it's a combination of science and tech and engineering and art and math.
Thank you. Yes. So pulling out the acronym Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Math. And what I know we have options like SEED is another design-based sort of cross-disciplinary field, and STEM also. And so what's sort of the specialty of STEAM? What's the benefit of bringing all five of these things together?
Use of different modalities.
Using different modalities as points of access.
Learning styles.
Yeah. So it's really opening up all of these subject matters by reaching different learning styles and different ways to access content.
I once saw an interview with Walter Isaacson talking about Leonardo and how Leonardo would have thought that the compartmentalization of information would be silly. That this is actually how the human mind works. We don't walk out into the world and thinking, oh, today I'm going to be a mathematician. That all these sensibilities are firing all the time. And if you can incorporate that into the teaching and learning, then that gives legitimacy to the way kids actually think as people when they go out into the world.
Thank you, Don. So that interdisciplinary content. And really connecting back to Ken's message too about how interdisciplinary content provides multiple points of access and ways in. Definitely. Okay, so the last slide I'm going to leave you guys with. Earlier this week, you may have gotten the opportunity to participate with the Bay Area Discovery Museum's workshops where they introduce Think, Make, Try as sort of a grade appropriate way to look at the engineering design process. And then on the left side, you'll see the Youth and Arts Observer Wheel. And so for a partnership with MCOE, where they did a video series called Creating Curiosity Out the Front Door, Youth and Arts paired up with them to do nature journaling and observation. And this wheel was created for that process. But what we found in creating it and also in using it in various different situations is that it is, in fact, our process of inquiry and how we have students approach making and learning. So it starts with see it, goes to sense it, then to move it, then to show it, then to question it, and then to remember it. And so all of that to say that, well, I would actually then like to throw it back to you guys and ask, are there similarities or differences between these two models and what we saw in our previous slides with the different engineering design processes and scientific method? So for this one, if you guys want to add to the chat, just maybe one similarity or one difference that you see. All right. So again, we're looking at circles, critical thinking design, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math are present here. The language is simplified. Great, and hopefully we'll get a couple more as well. But the general idea you guys are pointing out is that we took similar concepts, which were found across in visual creativity. We took similar concepts that were found across all of the different processes of inquiry, and we created our own based on the needs and goals of our learning community. And so as a sort of homework, we would like you guys to think about all of the content that we've learned over the last week, which we're going to synthesize tomorrow. And sorry, I'm looking at the comments now. So we have Eva's mentioned that she likes to step question it and think it connects to the retry step in Badham's wheel. Yes, definitely. Yeah, so everybody having these kinds of moments to do similar things that we find valuable in the inquiry process, but how we phrase it and how we implement it might look a little bit different. And Rose mentioning dynamic process. So the challenge, should you accept it, is we would like you to think about how to create a system or process of inquiry for your specific learning community based on some of the skills that you have learned this week. And you don't have to think about an answer now. We want you to take it with you and consider it over the next 24 hours, and then we'll have an opportunity in tomorrow's workshops to actually to workshop your ideas together. And Ken says funds of knowledge anchor learning and drive it. Thank you. So all of that to say, we are interested in taking what you've already learned and finding a way to apply it to your learning community, knowing that we're approaching the new year in a digital context, and that has been a primary concern for a lot of us as educators and how to connect our students in this digital learning space. And so in developing a process for your students, it could be an ethos of inquiry. So ideas around the ritual of skill building in your students around inquiry, or it could be actual tangible ways that you want to implement activities throughout a day with your kids. So keep this in mind. This is kind of just a framing for tomorrow's activities, which we hope you'll be able to join us with. And if you can't, we encourage you to take the idea and sort of work on it individually to synthesize some of your learnings from the week. And then I want to open it up to questions in case I wasn't being very clear with what we're asking or encouraging.
Yeah, would you mind just like repeating what the invitation is in a different way?
Yeah,
or in the same way, but I think I'm not getting it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So what we would like you to do just for tonight is to think about, really start by thinking about what you've learned from this week, what skills or processes of engagement or inquiry that you have learned, and think about where in your day they might fit. So we'll start with that. Tomorrow, what we're going to do is actually build, as Youth and Arts and Bay Area Discovery Museum has done, we're going to take the idea of a process of inquiry, a cyclical process of inquiry, and we are going to, we're going to attempt to co-create a process of inquiry based on the content and the skills that you've learned this week. Does that make more sense? Feel free to ask more questions because I know it's
The second part makes sense to me, but I got stuck on the first thing you said. So the first part is to, can you say it one more time? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, it's not on you guys. This is
I get the trying to put it into a model, like the second part, but the first part is just thinking about how we do it in a day.
So I think, and Dawn's actually going to help lead this tomorrow. So if you want to jump in at all, Dawn, that's fine too. But I think what will help in this process, working on it tomorrow, is to think about some of the activities and some of the modes of engagement that you've practiced this week in these workshops. Ones that specifically stand out to you as being useful for you and your learning community and your students. So for instance, if the movement-based SEL stuff is like, I can see using this, or if the teaching for robust understanding that you did with Jessica is like completely your jam, think about collecting some of these, as I'm sure you've been note-taking throughout the week, and you're gonna pull this all together tomorrow in a collaborative activity.
Gotcha. Thank you. That helped a lot.
Of course. Yeah. And I wanted to frame essentially that this is how you will be using that content, is to create this, this process for you and your students, to kind of try and summarize what you've learned throughout the week, as well as to think about specifically and explicitly the digital learning environment and what you anticipate working for your students. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
All right. And I'll stick around, and if you have additional questions regarding that, there isn't really an assignment as of right now. You're welcome, Catherine, I'm glad. Thanks for helping me get to that point, you guys. If you have questions, you're welcome to stick around and ask. Right now, we don't have an assignment so much as a work on what we would call the remember it stage of the observer's wheel, and just think back on what you have learned this week and what you want to pull out specifically. Yes, I know everyone's tired, so I do want to let you go. Feel free to sign off. We do have an eval form that we've been asking you guys to complete at the end of each day that you can find on the Google Slides. And if you can fill that out, it actually helps us a lot with our facilitation and how we adjust for the next day. So we really appreciate it.
It's not in my Google Slides though. I just want to point that out.
Yes.
It's in the other set of Google Slides that you were looking at this morning. Kelsey, do you have the link? Could you put it in the chat? That might be.
I certainly can, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen too. Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. And I'm still here too in case there are any questions, but I'll be on the call tomorrow, and I look forward to following up with, it looks like, a lot of you about the NOAA grant. So thank you again for your time and participation.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. So I'm just going to put the slide link in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks.
And if you guys are all set, you can hop off. I'm going to put my microphone on mute. If you have questions for Jessica, you're welcome to ask her. If you want to add to the chat any questions for me, I'm also happy to engage with you there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Jessica, I did have a question about the little interactive stickers and the backgrounds. I went to the link that was in the slide. I guess I'm a little bit confused. Should I just kind of click around and see what's for use on there? Or how can I get some of those things to use in my classroom? Because I know my students will really, really like that.
You mean on the CLEAN website?
Yeah.
Yep. So if you go to the, I think it's the building models page, it's like maybe the second or third bullet point down on the list on the home page that I sent you to.
Okay.
Those are for I think the version that's posted there, those are like the more complex scientific version. So we're going to be launching a new website in literally just like a week or two. And what I'm going to do is put the link to that new website in the chat. The address is going to change, but you will be able to see, let me, here's the new site. Okay, I just put it in. So, and then if you go to that page and then you go to the teaching resources, This is the direct link to, we call them the icons. These are the icon sets. And you'll see right now they're still labeled grades 3 through 5. I can set you another link there in the chat. But we're changing that language, that tag to everyday language, because what we found is that they're really appropriate for all grade levels, especially for being introduced to a lot of these concepts. So yeah, so really we encourage all levels to consider using either set. So, but yeah, that's where you can download all of the resources. It's just not a public site yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And of course we'll be using all of this in the NOAA grant. So I hope you can join us for that.
Yeah, I'm hoping to. So that's great. Thank you.
Jessica, your tool, your site, it really mirrors very nicely the United Nations Sustainable Goals. I have been using their particular
their
graphics, and I think this is another layer, very complex but very tangible layer that we could use to engage in further students' synthesis of materials and make it very meaningful to their daily lives, because they cannot necessarily connect the two between human interactions versus the environment they're living in. So I've been really using literature to bring in environmental changes.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting.
Well, good. I'm glad you think that they'll be useful, and I hope you can join us for the grant. And please reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more about how I've been using them with students and of lots of different ages. So yeah, I'd be happy to share more and hear about how you're using them too. So let's stay in touch.
And Kelsey?
Yeah.
I have been adding to the interactive notebook, so can I just present that? Or I've been, cutting and pasting. I've been adding more of my ideas. I've been using the technology tools to perhaps come up with prompts for students to engage, and have been adding those. So
yeah, I think that's a great place to start, and it kind of mirrors Deb's question in the chat where she asks what to do with the digital notebook. I think that's an excellent place to frame that activity from. So I would encourage you, especially if you've been really dedicating time to inputting information, I would definitely bring that to the activity tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna log off, I think, unless anyone else has any more questions. Thanks so much, Kelsey and Michelle.
Thanks, Jessica and Kelsey.
Thank you, guys.
Looking forward to tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
That's great.